The Moscow Metro has a reputation as one of the most efficient underground networks in the world. But it also has another purpose that no one here will talk about officially, and that is to protect as many as possible of Moscow's 8 million citizens from a nuclear attack.
AI just mapped the largest Soviet underground cities, and it changes everything we thought we knew about the Cold War. Decades of declassified files, satellite frames stretching back to the 1970s, terrain scans nobody could read until now. All of it fed in, all of it lining up, until fragments that were always kept apart became one continuous picture. For 50 years, nobody saw the whole thing, because the whole thing was never meant to be seen. What's surfacing underneath the Soviet Union is bigger than anything ever admitted out loud, and it forces one question they spent billions making sure you'd never ask. Why they dug. Let me tell you what they were afraid of, because once you understand the fear, everything underground starts to make a terrible kind of sense. The part of the Cold War everyone remembers happened above ground. The missiles on parade, the bombers on alert, the submarines slipping out into the Atlantic. That was the war you could see, and it was frightening enough on its own.
We cannot buy our security, our freedom from the threat of the bomb, by committing an immorality so great as saying to 1 billion human beings now enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, give up your dreams of freedom.
But there was a second war running at the same time, and it was being fought straight down, into rock, into granite, into the deep earth under cities and mountains. While the surface arms race took all the headlines, Soviet engineers were digging the opposite way, and they weren't building small. Here's the fear that drove it. In strategic circles, it had a name: decapitation. The idea that in the first minutes of a nuclear exchange, an enemy could destroy the leadership and the command system so fast that the entire country would be left blind and headless before it could even respond. No orders, no retaliation, no government, just thousands of warheads inbound and nobody left alive who could do anything about it. For the Soviet leadership, that wasn't paranoid imagination. It was a planning assumption. And the doctrine that grew out of it was simple and cold. Command had to survive even if the leaders did not. The state had to keep fighting, keep governing, keep retaliating after a strike that would have finished any ordinary nation by lunchtime. You cannot do that on the surface. The surface is where the warheads land. So the answer was to take the most important pieces of the state, the command posts, the communications, the leadership shelters, the machinery of retaliation, and bury them deep enough that no weapon could reach them. And there's a logic underneath the logic that explains the obsession. Soviet nuclear command was built around redundancy. If one layer is destroyed, another holds. If that one is gone too, there has to be a deeper one still. You don't build a system like that if you think the first strike ends the story. You build it if you've already decided the story continues, and that someone, somewhere, deep enough down, has to be alive and connected to keep it going. So, they kept going down. The question that should be bothering you now is the same one that bothered American intelligence for 30 years. How far down, and to do what? The evil mountains start in the Ural Mountains, at a peak with a name that sounds like it was invented for a horror film. Yamantau. In the local Bashkir language, the name translates roughly as Evil Mountain or Bad Mountain. It earned that name long before any of this. Something about bears, swamps, and treacherous terrain that made it a miserable place to be. But the name fits what grew there. Yamantau is the highest peak in the southern Urals. Construction associated with the mountain reportedly began back in the 1970s, deep in the Soviet era. And here's the detail that made American intelligence go cold.
He does exist, and according to both of these sources, he was indeed the first secretary of the Bashkir region, though the mentions of him online do have his name spelled slightly wrong with an extra O.
It did not stop when the Soviet Union did. The USSR collapsed. The economy went into freefall. Soldiers went unpaid. Whole institutions of the old superpower simply stopped functioning, and the digging at Yamantau kept going anyway, year after year, straight through the wreckage, swallowing what intelligence sources estimated ran into billions of dollars. Think about the order of priorities that takes. A country can stop paying its army before it stops digging a mountain. That tells you the mountain wasn't a luxury. It was load-bearing, something the state treated as more essential to its survival than the soldiers it could no longer afford. You do not spend money you don't have on a project unless that project matters more than almost everything else you own. The man who said the quiet part out loud was General Eugene Habiger, then the commander of U.S. Strategic Command, the officer in charge of America's entire nuclear arsenal. Speaking publicly about Yamantau in the 1990s, he described it as an enormous complex with millions of square feet of underground space. And then he said the line that has shadowed the mountain ever since. He admitted plainly that the United States did not have a clue what they were doing in there. Hold on to that. The man responsible for American nuclear strategy, with every satellite and analyst the United States could point at one mountain, told the public he could not tell you what it was for. The Russian government never explained it either. Over the years, when pressed, officials offered a shifting menu. It's a mine, it's a food store, it's a repository for treasures, it's a shelter for leadership in case of war. The answers don't match each other, and the official position has often been simpler still. Russia does not discuss what it builds for its own security with the foreign press. So, what is it? Honestly, nobody outside the program can say for certain. The credible theories cluster around a few possibilities: a continuity of government bunker, a strategic command facility, a deep military reserve, a backup seat of power. Reporting drawing on U.S. intelligence assessments has at points described it in terms as stark as a potential backup capital. Somewhere the Russian state itself could keep running from if Moscow were gone. What is not in dispute is the scale. This is not a basement with a generator. By every serious estimate, this is a complex large enough that analysts have spent 30 years failing to put a number on it. And there's something around the mountain that makes it heavier still. Nearby sits a closed town, access restricted, ringed by forest, the kind of place that exists on a map mostly as a name. Closed towns were a Soviet institution, whole communities built to serve a secret installation, their residents living their entire lives beside something they could never describe to an outsider. The town next to Yamantau is exactly that. A population whose purpose is the mountain, and a mountain whose purpose, officially, no one will state. Decades on, that silence has not broken, and it does not look accidental, because deliberate silence, maintained at that cost for that long, is itself a kind of evidence. The question is what kind of secret needs a town built around it just to be kept, and whether the same hand was hiding something under the capital itself. The train that wasn't real. Leave the mountains. Go to Moscow because the next part happened directly under one of the most photographed cities on Earth. For decades, Muscovites passed a rumor between them. They called it Metro 2. The claim was that beneath the famous public subway, the one with the chandeliers and the marble that tourists photograph,
I feel like that. It's so strange that this is a metro station. It's beautiful.
there was a second metro, secret, deeper, unmarked, built not for citizens but for the Soviet elite, to pull them out of the city and into shelters if the bombs ever fell. For a long time, that rumor was treated exactly the way you'd expect. A story. Urban legend. The kind of thing told late at night and laughed off by morning. Officials in Russia have, for years, neither confirmed it nor denied it, which, when you think about it, is its own kind of answer. But the legend would not die, and the reason it would not die is that pieces of it kept turning out to be real. The first serious crack didn't come from Russia. It came from the United States. In 1991, the U.S. Department of Defense published a report titled Military Forces in Transition. Buried inside it was a description of a deep underground network beneath Moscow, facilities interconnected by deep subway lines built to give Soviet leadership a fast, protected way to evacuate. It described leadership moving from peacetime offices, through concealed entrances, into protected quarters beneath the city. It described important deep underground command posts in the Moscow area, including one connected to the Kremlin itself, and noted that even the Soviet press had referred to a huge leadership bunker near Moscow State University. The document included a diagram of the system laid over a map of the city. That is a very long way from urban legend. This was not a tabloid. This was the United States Department of Defense, in writing, describing a hidden underground transport and shelter network beneath the enemy capital, and drawing it on a map. Then 2004, the year the rumor stopped being only a rumor. Vladimir Shevchenko, a man who had advised Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and Putin, an insider at the very top of the Russian state, publicly acknowledged that a secret line existed. He downplayed it the way insiders always do. He said the reports were exaggerated, that there had been a single-track underground line running from the Kremlin out to Stalin's dacha, built because Stalin lived in genuine fear of assassination.
Отныне наша задача будет состоять в том, чтобы истребить всех немцев до единого.
And that it was no longer in use. He added that there had been underground transport links between the general staff and other government facilities. Listen to what that admits even while it's minimizing. A senior figure who served 3 Russian and Soviet leaders confirmed on the record that a secret underground rail line beneath Moscow was real, and that the state had built protected underground transport links between its most sensitive buildings, and the careful work that's been done since lands in the same place, not on the wild end of the legend, but on the hard core of it. Researchers working from declassified archival material don't find an endless secret city sprawling for hundreds of miles. They find something narrower and far more credible, that by the late 1960s a deep classified line existed, running from the Kremlin out toward the area south of Moscow State University, with at least one branch reaching further. The truth came in smaller than the rumor, and somehow that makes it worse, because a myth you can dismiss, a real, deep, deliberately hidden government line under the Capitol, confirmed from 3 directions, you cannot. If your skin is doing what mine did the first time I followed this, that slow crawl as you realize the ground under one of the world's great cities was hollowed out for the end of the world, then do one thing before we go deeper. Hit subscribe. Channels like this one live or die on that single tap. And the deeper we go, the stranger it gets. Stay with me. Because we've only talked about hiding people so far. The next mountain wasn't built to hide anyone. It was built to do something. The mountain that holds the trigger. There's a second mountain in this story, and in some ways it's the most disturbing place of all, because we have a much better idea of what it does. Its name is Kozvinsky Kamen, Kozvinsky Stone. It sits in the central Urals, hundreds of kilometers north of Yamantau. From the outside, it's just a mountain.
Perhaps the mountain is a safe place for Russia to continue testing them away from the prying eyes of American satellites.
But analysts and open source reporting have long tied it to one specific very dark function. Kozvinsky Kamen is widely described as a hardened command post for Russia's strategic rocket forces, and as the command bunker linked to the system the West nicknamed the Dead Hand. The official Russian name for that system is Perimeter. It is one of the quietly most terrifying things human beings have ever built, and it is not a conspiracy theory. Its existence has been confirmed by senior Russian military officers, including former chiefs of the Strategic Missile Forces staff. Here's what Perimeter is designed to do. If the worst happens, a nuclear strike detected, and the line to the general staff suddenly dead, meaning the leadership may already be gone, the system is built to make sure retaliation happens anyway. Sensors watch for the seismic shock, the flash of light, the pressure wave, the radiation of nuclear detonations. The signals have to agree. One alarm isn't enough. The system is built to require several independent confirmations at once, so an accident or a single false reading can't end the world by mistake. But if the signals do line up and command has gone silent, launch authority drops down to whoever is left, deep inside a protected bunker, bypassing the normal chain of command entirely. One person, far underground, holding the last decision a country will ever make. Specialized command rockets can then fire, climb above the dying nation, and broadcast the launch order to every silo and submarine and bomber still able to hear it. It's a machine whose entire purpose is to guarantee that even a flawless surprise attack, one that kills every leader the country has, still ends in a full retaliatory strike. It exists so that an enemy can never believe decapitation will work, because the dead hand of the state will still close around the trigger. And the command center for that system is reportedly buried under roughly 1,000 feet of solid granite inside Kozvinsky Kamen, hardened specifically, so that even a weapon designed to dig into the earth and detonate cannot reach it. The timeline has a chill built into it. The Kozvinsky complex was not declared finished until 1996. The very next year, in 1997, the U.S. military introduced a new nuclear bunker buster bomb, widely read as a direct answer to exactly this kind of mountain. So, step back and look at it. Kozvinsky Kamen is not a shelter. A shelter is where you go to survive. This is the opposite. This is a mountain engineered to preserve the ability to strike back after the country that built it has, for every practical purpose, already died. It is command authority designed to outlive the commanders, and if a state will sink a mountain like that into the earth just to keep its hand on the trigger after death, the real question isn't whether the network is big, it's what the size of it was admitting. What the picture shows, now the mapping. And I'm going to be straight with you, because the truth here is stronger than any exaggeration. No system uncovered hidden cities full of secrets beneath Russia. There are no green men in Yamantau. There is no confirmed endless metropolis under Moscow running to the horizon. Anyone selling you that is selling you something. The real story doesn't need it. The exaggeration would only make it weaker. What modern analysis can genuinely do is this. Take satellite imagery from the 1970s and compare it, frame against frame, to imagery from the 1990s and today, and detect where mountains were opened, where rock spoil from tunneling was dumped, where roads and rail spurs and ventilation appeared in the middle of nowhere for no civilian reason. Red terrain at a resolution no analyst hunched over a light table in 1985 could ever reach. Cross-reference decades of declassified intelligence against geography and against itself, and surface the pattern hiding inside thousands of pages no single human could ever hold in their head at once. That is the revelation, not a discovery of fantasy, a reconstruction of logic. Assemble all of it. Yamantau's unexplained scale, the Moscow network the Soviets quietly admitted, Kozvinsky's command function, the supporting tunnels and shelters and links between them. And you are not looking at a scatter of unrelated bunkers. You are looking at a system, coherent, deliberate, nationwide, built for one purpose. The tools didn't find a secret. They made an old, fragmented, deliberately buried secret legible. And once it's legible, the scale stops being a rumor and starts being a question you can't unask. What kind of future were they so certain of that they'd build the answer this big? The other hidden world. Before this turns into a story about one country's particular darkness, you have to hear the other half. It doesn't soften the point, it sharpens it. The United States did exactly the same thing. Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, a command complex carved into solid rock, so well known that Russia's mountain bunkers are routinely compared to it. Raven Rock, the underground military complex meant to function as an alternate Pentagon. Mount Weather in Virginia, a continuity of government site built to hold pieces of the U.S. government if Washington were destroyed. Different country, different language, identical logic.
It takes about 2 weeks for rainfall to get from the top of the mountain down to here. This is our domestic water for people inside the mountain. We pump this water.
Both superpowers, separately, in secret, looked at the weapons they had built and reached the same verdict. The surface cannot be defended. So both of them dug, hardened against their own inventions, designed to let command and government persist after the cities above them were gone. That's the thread that ties everything together, and it's bigger than any single mountain. The Cold War was not only a race to build the weapons, it was, just as seriously and just as secretly, a race to survive them. Two civilizations spending staggering sums to engineer their own continuation beneath the earth, each assuming the other might be doing the same, and each, it turns out, exactly right. But the rock is only half of it. What they built inside the rock is where it stops being strategy and starts being something else. The engineering of forever. Stop on what these places actually required, because the engineering itself tells you how serious the intent was. These were not concrete boxes. To build something that can take a near miss from a nuclear weapon, you have to defeat physics. You need depth. Hundreds of feet of rock or granite overhead. Not as decoration, but as armor, because rock is the only shield that works against that kind of energy. The granite over the Kozvinsky Command Center isn't a coincidence of geology. It was chosen. Roughly 1,000 feet of solid stone, picked precisely because it is the kind of mass a warhead cannot punch through, then hardened further on top of that. You need structures inside the rock that can ride out the shock of a detonation transmitted through solid stone, which is its own brutal problem. You need communications that survive electromagnetic effects that would fry ordinary electronics across an entire region. You need independent power because the grid will not exist. You need air filtration because the air outside will be lethal. You need water, food, and the ability to run for a long time, with no help from a surface that may not be there. These places were designed to operate as closed systems, sealed, self-sufficient, cut off from the world and still functioning. That is not the description of a bomb shelter. A bomb shelter is where you wait for the danger to pass. These were built on the assumption it would not pass, that the world above might simply be gone, and the job was to keep working anyway. Even the trains tell you that. On the secret Moscow lines, by multiple accounts, the rolling stock wasn't standard metro equipment. There was no electrified third rail powering the trains the way it does on the public system. Instead, short trains, a battery or diesel locomotive pulling a single car, could run with no power infrastructure at all. Sit with what that choice means. Someone designed transport that would still move after the electrical grid feeding a normal subway had ceased to exist. Every detail carries the same assumption baked into it. Build it so it survives the loss of everything around it. Build enough of that, connect it, staff it, power it, and you have not built shelters. You've built the skeleton of a society designed to exist underground, not a fantasy city. Something colder and more real than that, the minimum viable state, engineered to survive the end of the one above it. And the moment you say that out loud, you've stumbled onto the thing they never admitted, because a state only builds its own afterlife if it expects to need one. Why it changes everything. Here's where the title finally pays off, and why it changes everything is not hype. Look at what the scale implies, all of it at once. You do not bury a command post under 1,000 feet of granite if you think nuclear war means the end of everything. You do not keep digging a mountain complex through the financial collapse of your whole country if you think there will be nothing left to govern. You do not build a parallel railway under your capital to move your leadership into shelters if you believe there is no after. Every one of those choices only makes sense if the people making them believe something specific, that nuclear war would not be the end, that it would be survivable for the state, for command, for the few who made it underground, that on the far side of the worst day in human history, there would still be a government to run, orders to give, and a world, however ruined, to give them in. That's what changes. We remember the Cold War as a standoff held in place by certainty that nuclear war meant the end of everything, that nobody would start it because nobody could survive it. The underground tells a different story. It turns the era from a story about deterrence into a story about expectation. The bunkers do not say we hope this never happens. The bunkers, by their depth and their costs and their refusal to stop, say we expect it might, and we intend for the state to still be standing on the other side. That is a colder, lonelier, more honest picture of those decades than the one most of us grew up with. And both sides built it. What the reconstruction reveals is not a hidden science fiction world beneath Russia. It is something harder to look at directly. The true scale of how seriously the most powerful governments on Earth plan to outlive their own apocalypse. Not as a contingency folded in a drawer, as a decades-long, budget-defying, mountain-hollowing national priority pursued through collapse and straight into the present day. A machine for outliving the end of the world. The Cold War was never only a race to build weapons. It was, just as urgently and far more quietly, a race to survive the end of the world underground, and both sides were running it. So here's the question I'll leave you with, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. If two governments spent decades and fortunes building places to survive a nuclear war, what does it tell you that they were so sure they'd need them? Were they being paranoid, or were they being honest about us? Tell me where you land. And if you want to see how deep this actually goes, watch the next one. Because the American side of this, Raven Rock and Mount Weather, the places built so the United States government could keep running after Washington was gone, is its own buried story. And it is every bit as strange as the mountains in the Urals.